Professor Ted, welcome to CGTN. You are a sinologist specializing in Taoist philosophies. I wonder, when you talk to your friends and family back home, how would you describe exactly what is it that you do and why you love it so much?
That's a question I get a lot, and sometimes people are a little confused of why I would study something so obscure. Let me first clarify. We can start with the first line of the classic, the earliest classic of Taoism, which is the Tao Te Ching, also known probably more commonly in English as Tao Te Ching. I also refer to it by the name of the author or the supposed author, Lao Tzu. The first line says, "The Tao that can be Tao is not the eternal or constant Tao." This kind of statement is very confusing, and part of what I think is fun about Taoism is there's a lot of wordplay, paradox, inverting our sense of normal ideas. And so it can be quite good at shaking up our ways of thinking, so we can be inspired to think about our lives or the world in a new way. So then how do I explain, I study something that you can't talk about, right? That's kind of a fun way to start to introduce what Taoism is.
Take us back to when you were 14 and came across the Tao Te Ching for the very first time. Was it an immediate attraction, or did it develop over time? Did you know at the time it was going to be a whole career?
Well, certainly I didn't know at 14 that it would be a whole career, but there was an immediate attraction. It was also kind of an accident. I mean, I went to the library to do some research for a high school social studies paper, and I was looking at the different books on Eastern religion and philosophy, and there weren't very many in my local library. I was from a fairly small town in the US. So I looked at all of them to see if any of them would be useful for my project. And one of them was the Tao Te Ching. And it was also stood out because the book itself had large photographs and calligraphy, and the layout was very aesthetic. So visually it was quite gripping. But then also, once I started reading it, I thought, this is really different. This is something I've never encountered before. But at the same time, it felt like, oh, this feels familiar, or feels kind of in line with some of the things I value and I think about. For example, I grew up in a pretty rural place in western Massachusetts, and I enjoyed my time in my youth in the forest, in the mountains, and being close to the natural world and to appreciate the harmonious, living existence of that kind of environment. And then in Taoism, there's this very sophisticated way of articulating human relationship to the cosmos that seemed to resonate with me. And I took out the book from the library and I brought it with me to school. So even in the middle of class, I was reading the Tao Te Ching when the teacher was talking. And so it did grip me right away. And so the next year, I was very fortunate to be able to study Chinese language in my high school.
You're one of the younger sinologists that I know, and you just told us about this beautiful accident, if you will, that got you hooked with the Tao Te Ching. Do you think today's high schoolers and college kids would maybe also come across Tao Te Ching in a similar way when they're not so preoccupied with short videos, TikTok, and social media?
Well, how would they encounter it? Maybe not in a similar way. I mean,
people don't go to libraries
People don't go to physical libraries. I mean, part of what I actually think is sad about the digital world we live in is exactly these kinds of experiences where you go to the library, there are all these books, and you can just pick one, right? Because they're organized by topic. Of course, you can have accidental encounters on the internet, and that can also be exciting and inspiring. And so maybe that's what would happen in this generation. They would, see a video about Taoism, or they might have some other kind of entry point. So it won't be necessarily the same experience or the same point of contact, but you just need one moment, right? To have these moments of inspiration or surging of curiosity, the form of the media doesn't really matter.
It comes around back to how you promote Tao Te Ching or Taoism. I mean, you wear many hats now. You're a researcher, you're a professor. You had a global research center that is tasked with increasing the awareness, the understanding, and the exchange culturally, how are you reaching out to a wider and larger audience here?
Well, I'm talking to you today, so that's one way to reach out through mass media. My interest is actually not so much in reaching out, though I think I have to learn that, as you said, how to incorporate that task into what I'm doing. I'm interested in, as I said again, bringing different people together, and then the question is, how do you find those people? How do those people find you? How do you create a global network of scholars and maybe even, artists or writers who have this point of contact, the same interest in this one classic and its ideas and its philosophy? And so media is important just so people are aware that, oh, we can come together in this, with this center, right? This provides a platform for people to interact with each other across languages, across cultural boundaries, national boundaries. I don't know if I consider it promotion. I think it's outreach, right? It's like, how do we reach out to more people to connect them? Because again, there's not the awareness that, oh, we have this point of shared interest.
I guess the lessons from that is that teachings are just as important as promotions. When you want more people to know what Taoism is all about. You now run a research center, the Global Exegetics Research Center at Nankai University. What is it that you do, and how are you promoting your findings to a larger audience?
Why do I use this name, Global Exegetics? Global is a perspective, but it's also a reality. This classic is now a global classic, or a classic of all humanity. And over many years, I searched through the world and went to, through the internet or in person, going to libraries to find all the different translations in all the languages. This book is translated and published over and over again. Every year, the numbers increase quite quickly. But over 2,052 translations in 97 different languages, which is an incredible quantity of translations for one book, right? It's probably the second most translated book in history. I would argue that what makes something a classic is not that it was written a long time ago, but it's that in every generation, people say, oh, this is still valuable to me. Like for me personally, I was just, a 14-year-old kid in America, and I read this 2,500-year-old book that came from China, and I said, oh, this is relevant to me now in 20th century America. That's what makes it a classic. Or you have famous people who will read the classic, but which version did they read? Whose understanding did they encounter that then inspired them? For example, there's the famous author in Russia, Leo Tolstoy. Leo Tolstoy is a big fan of the Tao Te Ching. But so then if we want to understand why was he a fan of the Tao Te Ching, he wasn't reading in Chinese. Whose version did he like? Whose Tao Te Ching inspired him, right? So there are lots of these historical encounters to be studied, right? I mean, it's actually quite a huge topic.